Hey everybody, this is Lauren Stine over here at Activate. I am the implementation manager, and today we're going to be going over question and answers. Prior to the webinar, we had quite a few customers send in questions, so we'll be covering that first. And then once we're completed with the ones that were sent in prior, we will be going over the questions that you send in today live. So let's go ahead and get started. There were quite a few questions about what synchronizes and where things are maintained in each system. So I wanted to throw this graphic up here that we show to a lot of people just so you can get a better idea on what happens in Activate, what happens in QuickBooks or your other accounting softwares, and then also what is synchronized between the two. So in Activate, you have CRM, sales, that's all the way from sales order to invoice, shipping workstation, integrations, inventory management. Obviously, Activate is an inventory management software, so we handle everything item related. Once you integrate with Activate, the item list is no longer maintained in QuickBooks, but Activate does create items in your item list based on the product class setup, specifically to use for the sales invoice detail lines in QuickBooks. Activate also handles all purchasing from purchase order to vendor bill, as well as we have business activities, which can be used for CRM, and then we also have mobile and barcodes, e-commerce, and EDI. QuickBooks handles your receivables, payables, expenses, checks, bank reconciliation, financial reports, payroll. This includes your lists like a sales tax setup. Activate gets the sales tax setup from QuickBooks to see which rate should be charged to your customers. Also, Activate gets the vendor list that's maintained in QuickBooks, and also synchronized over to Activate. So this gets into that middle section. So we've got codes, so that's going to be your payment methods, your terms codes, a sales rep list. Also, GL accounts are maintained in QuickBooks, but you have access to them in Activate to use for your transactions. The vendor list is maintained completely in QuickBooks, but is utilized in Activate for adding vendor records and vendor pricing to products, as well as creating your purchase orders and vendor bills in Activate. Customers actually sync both ways. We definitely recommend creating or maintaining the customer record in Activate. That goes back to the point where the customer records sync, yes, they sync both ways, but in QuickBooks, the only thing that syncs to Activate is the main customer information. So if you have price lists that are extensive or a bunch of ship to locations and also additional customer contacts, all of those are going to be managed in Activate. So that's why we recommend using Activate to maintain your customers, but the main customer information does sync both ways. Activate also has quite a few fields that are used in Activate and not available in QuickBooks, like branch. Branch is one of the main ones. Branch tells Activate which accounts receivable account to use, and that's very important, specifically if you're going to use branch for something like QuickBooks class tracking or any other really additional, let's say if you're using multi-currency, you have to have a different branch for each currency because the currency is related to the specific accounts receivable account. Also, invoices sync both ways, and then payments as well, vendor bills, and journals. Journals are created by Activate and synchronized to QuickBooks and can be updated through the sync based on transactions that you're posting in Activate. So let's say you've posted a receipt and you've sold your customer the products that were included in that receipt, and then a month down the road or however long it takes you to get your third-party freight bills to get your products to your warehouse, you can create a landed cost bill to allocate that cost across those sessions, and then the sync will update the related cost of goods sold journals that are sent through those sales invoices if they were affected by those landed cost entries. And then I mentioned QuickBooks class tracking because we did have some questions on class tracking specifically come in. So Activate can be configured to use QuickBooks class tracking, which will allow users to track sale and cost of goods sold on profit and loss by summarizing the sales and cost of goods sold by a number of different options, like your QuickBooks class tracking or maybe even your product classes. So once class tracking is enabled in QuickBooks, users can configure Activate to use these classes on your sales invoices. So there are two options. The first one is for invoice, which can be assigned to branch, salesperson, and customer type. And then there's another option for invoice details, which also can be assigned to the ones included in the invoice list as well as sales category and product class. The most common use for QuickBooks class tracking is going to be branch, since a lot of our customers utilize QuickBooks classes to track a specific location if they do have multiple storefronts, or even down to different departments, and you can use branches to separate those. Again, that's the most common, but you have the ability to use any of these lists to assign the QuickBooks classes to. After you've selected the categories to assign the classes to, you'll be able to go to that section of configuration and assign them as needed. So let's go ahead and take a look at Activate, and we'll get into Configuration Manager to where you can see where this information is going to be. All right, and that's File, Configuration Management. All right, and Sales Orders, and then Sales COGS. So you can see here, QuickBooks Class Tracking assigned to Branch, but the invoice has either none, so none is going to be the default if you don't have QuickBooks Class Tracking enabled in QuickBooks. But once you do, you can do Branch, Salesperson, or Customer Type. And then again, the invoice detail lines gives you a little bit more categories because you'll be able to assign it to the specific categories related to those product categories, like product class and sales category, because again, that's going to be related to the detail lines instead of the invoice as a whole. And then also just a note, the sales COGS accounts, right now I've got it selected by product class. That again, that's the most common way to assign sales and cost of goods sold. This tells Activate what income and cost of goods sold account to use whenever you're creating sales invoices. So if you've got it assigned to product class, it's going to be based on each detail line. If you've got it assigned to branch, salesperson, or customer type, you're only going to be able to do it at header level. You're not going to be able to assign sales and cost of goods sold based on the type of product it is, because it's going to be based on something that's at the header level instead of the details. So now if we save this and we go to customer branch, you can see here at the bottom this class selection. So you would go, if you've got it assigned to the branches, you would go through each branch and assign the QuickBooks class to each of those branches. So that way when you run a sync for those sales invoices, those invoices or those details will show on the QuickBooks reports. So in QuickBooks, you have a profit and loss by class as well as a balance sheet by class. And so what that does is that gives you the ability to run those reports, and you'll see the class across the top and the GL accounts across the left-hand side. So right now we've got this balance sheet by class up on screen. You can see Dallas, Fort Worth, unclassified, and a total column across the top. So this is going to be all of your QuickBooks classes. And then you'll see your general ledger accounts here across the left-hand side. So if you were to use warehouses to separate your inventory asset accounts, then you would see, your inventory asset, and then you would also see those inventory asset accounts that you've got set up that are distinct per warehouse with their own totals per class, as well as the cumulative total on the right-hand side. So let's just take a look at the P&L by class as well, just so you can get an idea on kind of how this all works. This is my demo company, so the transactions are kind of old, so we have to do by all, and you can see here your profit and loss by class. Again, the classes are going to be across the top with each class, the unclassified and the total amounts, and then you've got your GL accounts across the left-hand side. So if you were going to be using product classes to distinguish specific income and cost of goods sales accounts, maybe related to your categories of products, maybe for your product classes, and you wanted to be descriptive and unique, then you would see that breakout here as well, because as you're invoicing, if you've got distinct GL accounts assigned for sales or cost of goods sold, you'll see the list of the accounts on the left-hand side and then the details therein for each of the classes. All right, so now let's get into purchasing. We had quite a few questions actually come in about the Reorder Wizard and also reorder reports. So using the Reorder Wizard gives you the ability to create bulk POs for your vendors. With this functionality, there are going to be 2 reports available inside the Reorder Wizard once you've saved selections. So you'll have the reorder proof and the reorder proof by supplier. So the difference between those is one is grouped by supplier and one is not. There is an alternate inventory reorder report that's separate from the Reorder Wizard. This is just a report. It does not give you the ability to create POs, but you can utilize it as a stepping stone to manually create the purchase orders in the PO window. It really just depends on your own comfortableness with Activate, on which one you'd like to use. Personally, I like to use the Reorder Wizard, and when I have new implementations, I always direct them to the Reorder Wizard, because that not only gives them the information you see in the report, but it also allows them to create the purchase orders. And this reorder report is found in the warehouse section of the inventory reports. So let's jump back into Activate and take a look at just a brief overview of the Reorder Wizard. We do have an entire webinar on business alerts, which the Reorder Wizard is inside of business alerts. So if you need a more in-depth view of what we're going to touch on today, feel free to check out that webinar. Again, that's based on business alerts as a whole. So in the reorders, this is called the Reorder Wizard. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck Group by Vendor, and we've got the Dallas warehouse. So you can see this pocket calendar C10 in the Dallas warehouse. It's recommending to order 125 to get the quantity available to equal the maximum quantity of 200. So you see suggested quantity of 125. On order is going to be what's listed on issued purchase orders. On hand is what you have on hand, but you can see here that the available quantity is 50. So the Reorder Wizard is going to suggest quantities to reorder based on your available quantities. And if we scroll over here to the right, you'll be able to see minimum stock quantity is 100, maximum stock quantity is 200, which is why it's suggesting 125, because we've got available of 50, on order of 25, and the max stock quantity is 200. We also have supplier last cost, average cost, and then the last cost for the product. All right, so let's go ahead and click Reorder. Now when we click Reorder, you can see these checkboxes on the left-hand side that appear. This is how you're going to create POs. You also have some more available fields like preferred supplier. This is the preferred supplier on the product. The Reorder Wizard is always going to default to the preferred supplier if there is one. If you don't have a preferred supplier or you want to use a different supplier, you would select that alternate supplier in the drop-down for supplier name. Now this is not going to be your complete list of suppliers or vendors. This is only going to be vendors that are already assigned to the product. So if you need to add to this list, you'll have to open the product, add that vendor. If you have a specific price for that vendor, feel free to do so on the product window, and then refresh this window and you'll be able to see the new supplier that you've added. So I'm going to go ahead and group by vendor, and again, this is going to group by that preferred supplier. If you were to change it, refresh it, it will move anything that's changed into whatever supplier you changed it to. And then also this blank one is anything that doesn't have a preferred supplier selected. And then you can select from the drop down to see, okay, well, it's not preferred, but I want to go ahead and do by atoms. And then let's see if Glass Cleaner has anything. And we'll do Berkeley paper. It asks you if you want to refresh. Do you want to save it? Sure, let's go ahead and save it. So now we've got that new atoms. It automatically selected it because I selected a PO supplier. So if you're going to select a PO supplier, Activate is going to automatically assume that you're going to want to reorder it because you took the time to select the supplier, so it's going to add it and check it to be reordered. So that's why you see this checkbox for Berkeley paper. And then you can see here that we've got 2 products listed. And if you wanted to, you could go ahead and check both or uncheck and check all. All right, and then you'll see the cumulative total here across the top for anything that you've selected, and then you can update the PO quantity. So this is the quantity that's going to be listed on the PO itself. And then you can also update the PO cost. If let's say you're on the phone with this vendor, you order a bunch of products from this vendor, and while you're on the phone, they're saying, okay, well, since you're going to order this much, let's go ahead and, we'll sell this one to you for $45 instead of $47.50. All right, and then we'll go ahead and save selections. And then this is the print proof. So what you do is you have the inventory reorder proof. This is just the standard proof. It doesn't group by vendor. It really is just a full list of what you've selected here on the Reorder Wizard. And then we've also got the reorder proof by supplier. And that groups it by supplier and then by product. And it shows you the same information as well as a report total. Okay, so I'm going to clear the selections because I don't want this to change what the report looks like. So let's take a look at that inventory report that's outside of the Reorder Wizard. So that's going to be in the inventory reports, warehouse section, and the inventory reorder report. These are the available filters to run the reorder report. You can filter by warehouse, product class, sales category, product type, vendor, and product ID. You can also change these filters in configuration management in the report catalog if you like. To use the filters, you click in the filter to choose the specific drop down that you want to do. We're going to do equal to and then Dallas. It's going to do value 1 only because I've got it set to equal to. If I've got it set to between, it's going to give me value 1 and value 2 to give me 2 warehouse selections to choose from. All right, preview. And then you can see here the same information. We've got C10 pocket calendar. We've got both vendors that are assigned to the product. On hand is 200. We've got 150 listed on sales orders. So that means we have 50 available. And then we've got quantity on order is the quantity on PO, 25. And again, that's an issued PO, which we'll get into here in a second. Net available of 75 with a minimum stock quantity of 100, a maximum quantity of 200, and a minimum reorder quantity of 50. So the recommended quantity that it's going to suggest is 125 units. I want to touch on this minimum reorder quantity. So if your availability goes below your minimum quantity, it's going to suggest anything over your minimum reorder quantity to purchase. If you have vendors that you have to purchase in certain quantities, like let's say your vendor only does 10 or cases or something, it's best to use unit of measure to maintain that rather than minimum reorder quantity, because unit of measure is going to ensure this says 50, but that's just 50 units, and it's only going to round it up to 50 if you need to order it and you're wanting to order maybe a little bit more than your maximum stock quantity. Or if it goes below your minimum but not enough to order, the full 50, it's going to still say 50. So if you have vendors that only sell it to you in cases or boxes or, a certain quantity, I would definitely suggest setting up a unit of measure that relates to that conversion. So that way you would order a number of boxes or cases, you would restrict their users to that instead of leaning on them a little bit more heavily to understand that you have to order in quantities of 50. If that makes any sense. And then just another reiteration, this can be your starting point to create POs, but I definitely recommend using the Reorder Wizard because that gives you the added functionality of also being able to create purchase orders. Because right here, this is a printable form that somebody's going to go through and hand write what quantities they want to reorder, and then they're going to have to go back and create purchase orders for those reorders. All right, so when issuing purchase orders, we had a few questions about issuing purchase orders, how to complete purchase orders, to get them off your list and suggestions on that. So when issuing purchase orders, keep in mind this affects your on PO quantity for reorders. Any item listed on an issued purchase order will also show an on PO quantity when filtering your product lookup by warehouse. So that way, we had some customers ask if we had an alert when an item is already listed on a purchase order. So for those of you that need to be alerted that are not using the Reorder Wizard, I would definitely suggest filtering your product lookup window when you're creating purchase orders on warehouse, the warehouse that you're ordering for, so that way you can see if that product is listed on PO. Again, if you use the Reorder Wizard takes that into account, so you wouldn't have to really worry about that as like another step in your purchasing process. All right, and then let's just take a quick look at Activate on the lookup window. Okay, so the available in, this is where you would see those filters. You can do any, which is going to be any warehouse that you have listed in your database, or a specific warehouse. So if we change it to Dallas, you see available, on hand, and on PO are now available here. So this gives you some insight on what products are already listed on POs for those of you, again, that are not using that Reorder Wizard. So this will give you some insight on that whenever you're adding lines to a purchase order, because this product lookup window is going to be the same on any window that you're choosing a product on. Also, issuing a purchase order does not affect your quantity on hand. You actually have to create and post is the word here, a receipt to add quantity on hand, or if you're doing a negative to return items to your vendor, they have to be posted to affect your quantity on hand. This posting process typically uses your accrued purchase receipts account. Now, we do have some people that create their own GL account for purchases. Just make sure that it is an other current liability. That's because it's the value of inventory that's been received but not yet invoiced. Okay, and then we did have some questions come in specifically about accrued purchase receipts. So when you create POs, receive, and invoice all in Activate, the balance of your accrued purchase receipts account will accurately reflect the balance of items received but not yet invoiced. Now this is if you don't have any sync errors. If you have any sync errors, make sure to resolve those, especially if you're seeing discrepancies in the value of what should be in accrued purchase receipts. For our customers paying with credit cards and not using purchase orders or invoices in Activate, just be very careful that when you're adding those entries in QuickBooks, that you're utilizing the same GL account that's listed on the purchases account for the warehouse that you're ordering that product for. And also take special care to match the price paid for said inventory in the receipt session that you're going to post to make sure that Activate also reflects what's being ordered and received. All right, invoicing a purchase order in Activate will not only create the vendor bill during your next sync, but will also reconcile any pricing differences between receipt and invoice. So this means discrepancies in the receipt session will be resolved by creating the invoice with the proper price. The original receipt journal will be updated during the sync to reflect the price you actually paid for the items. If the receipt itself was completely incorrect due to unit of measure, maybe somebody toggled the unit of measure and received the incorrect amount, or the item itself was incorrectly received. Let's say you had a bunch of items listed on the same receipt session and the user didn't take care and go through and remove the items you didn't actually receive. If you had a partial receipt, then you could either void the session or post another receipt session to offset whatever was posted incorrectly. So to view the bill, run a sync and open it in QuickBooks. You'll see the details utilizing the purchases account assigned to each warehouse for each detail line listed on the PO invoice. Anything that was added as an other amount or landed cost, the accounts reflected on the vendor bill detail lines will be the ones that were selected for other amounts or your landed cost account assigned to the warehouse. So let's get back into Activate again and view a vendor bill that came from Activate. So if we take a look at Berkeley Paper, I've got an invoice from today. There are 4 lines. They're all going to accrued purchase receipts because that's the GL account assigned to the warehouse as the purchases account. As you notice, it's on the expenses tab. That's because Activate maintains your items. QuickBooks no longer maintains your items, so you won't see them in this item tab over here. And then also you'll see the purchase order that this invoice is related to in the memo. So let's open that purchase order 1237 because I want to show you what it looks like when you update the price on an invoice. You'll get a message. So let's click invoice. Now you can either invoice from the original purchase order or open the purchase invoice window directly and enter in the PO number or select it from the lookup. Give it an invoice number, an invoice date, and then you can see here all the red lines are the things that are from the purchase order as well as the receipt session. So there's nothing outstanding. We've received everything. The received quantities show the total received quantities, and the approved quantity is going to be whatever has been received but has not been invoiced. If you have non-inventoried items or non-standard items listed on your purchase order, you will have to manually approve the quantities. This is because you don't receive non-inventoried or non-standard items. So Activate doesn't know what you're actually approving to pay in case this is a partial invoice. So let's go ahead and update this. Maybe instead of $11.50, for some reason the second invoice was $11. So we're going to change that. Now that we've got the invoice number, invoice date, the total reflects the total amount that I'm holding in my hand. You save it and then click Create Invoice. Now here's the message I was talking about. 1 or more receipts have been entered for line 2 of this purchase order, which is the line that I changed. However, the unit cost changed. So this is prompting you to update the unit cost of the related receipt. Of course, I want to do that because I want my inventory value to reflect what I actually paid to get this inventory into my warehouse, whether this is a purchase order or a landed cost. This is completing the purchase order, it's prompting me to complete the purchase order because I have now invoiced every line on the purchase order. Go ahead and click yes. The purchase invoice window stays open. That's due to the assumption that you may be entering more than one purchase invoice at a time. So now what you would do is you'd look up the next purchase order that you're going to invoice and the details will fill in based on the details that are open on that purchase order. All right, moving on to sales and customers. There were a handful of questions about availability on web stores, specifically for kits, and then I'm also going to touch on inventoried items. On the product window, any item that you sell or you want to send availability to your web store, make sure you mark as available on web. This actually inserts a record into the product availability by template view for each of those items that are checked. For those items, you'll see it per template, their availability. If it is a kit item, the kit will show availability based on the cumulative availability of the components. What this means is you can list your kit as available on web, but not necessarily the components, unless you actually do sell the components as individual units on your web store. Then you can mark both of them. But each unit in that view is treated as its own unique record. So let's say if you set a kit and also its components, you'll see the availability for the kit as well as the availability for the components as if you're creating a new sales order. So just simply checking that doesn't cause any issues with your availability in Activate. If a component is listed on multiple kits, again, each kit is treated as its own availability number, so it will take that into account for each unique instance. So having it listed on multiple kits doesn't affect the availability for each kit. So let's take a look again in Activate. I'm going to show you a little snapshot in the database so you can kind of see this view. This isn't something that you can see on screen, but this is what Activate sends whenever you've got that option checked to export inventory on your web store template. So you see here I've got Magento. The other ones don't show available quantities because those are sales order imports, and since they're sales order imports, there's no web store to send availability to, so it doesn't have any information. But for the ones that are Magento, you see this right here, this B85-1 is a kit, and it's showing 196 available. So if we go to this product in Activate, you see here there's no availability on the screen. But on the Components tab, it says 0.1 cases. And then you'll see here that on hand and available for warehouse D is 8. So let's get into this. Since the quantity is 0.1 cases, it's taking that 0.1 and it's dividing this 19.6 as a cumulative, because on that Magento side I don't have a specific warehouse specified for the export of availability. It's going to show 196 because again it's divided by that 0.1 component quantity. If I were to change, we'll just see that again, 196. If I were to change the web store options, web store, configure, you'll select the web store template that you're modifying, hit edit, and you hit next until you get to the options section. You see this comma separated warehouse IDs for inventory export. So let's say for this specific template, I only want to export availability for one warehouse. When this comes into play, at least the most common, is when we have our customers that have an Amazon web store template and they do FBA, so fulfilled by Amazon, and FMA, which is fulfilled by merchant. So obviously fulfilled by Amazon, you would want to default to your FBA warehouse because that's going to send the availability of what Amazon's warehouse actually has sitting in their warehouse, and it would be separate from what you have in your own physical warehouse. So I'm going to move off the line and hit cancel because we're going to come back here in a second, but I want to refresh that view so you can see how that changes it. Now B85-1 has availability of 80, and that's because warehouse D has availability of 8. So it divides that by 0.1, which gives you a total kit availability of 80. And then the inventory items, it sends the availability based on the actual availability for each individual item. All right, and there are a ton of other options for web store templates, including creation of customers for guests on your shopping cart. So these are for people that come in and don't create a login, but they still purchase stuff from you. That's considered a guest, and it can create a customer record based on that information that comes in, depending on your web store template. Reminders for warnings, so if you get a warning on your web store import, it'll create a business alert for you to go through and reprocess that order. The shipped quantity being sent for items that have been shipped, also exporting inventory availability, and so forth. So let's go back to that web store options page. Again, hit next. And then, so we have all these options. Now, some of these options are specific to Magento. Some templates do have different options. Like I know some templates, instead of last web order number imported, it has a timestamp. That just depends on your cart. Just know or be aware that the options can be different depending on which template you're using. All right, so we've got, export inventory. This means we will send the inventory availability. This does not mean we maintain your product list and or price list on your web cart. That's very important for you to understand. We have quite a few customers that utilize multiple web stores, which all have different items and price lists. So Activate cannot take control or own the product and or price list for your web stores, because again, we do have a lot of customers that use multiple platforms with different pricing and even different item setup. Another note that goes along with that is this export inventory by alternate product ID. We allow web store specific alternate IDs on an item. So this enables users to create one item to track multiple web store specific IDs rather than maintaining multiple product records for something that's actually the same product. So you don't have to do a receipt to move items from one product to another product or anything like that to get it to be available. You would use the alternate IDs to do this. So on the alternate IDs tab of the product window, you can say we've got B85-kit, and then say you can give it its own description, and then your type. Now that I have Magento set up, you can do web store, and you can say this is a Magento specific alternate ID. And then this one could be even like another one that's just a generic alternate ID. And then if you check it as primary, it will now show as this alternate product ID up here. All right, and then let us know if you have any questions about specific options here as well. All right, another question that came in was regards to user permissions for credit hold. Keep in mind, when a customer is on credit hold, you won't be able to print any forms on the sales order or pick items until that credit hold is released. The users with proper permissions can release this hold. They'll be required to use their login ID and password to release the hold, when doing so from another computer where somebody else is logged in that does not have the permission. So let's take a look at where those user permissions are. That's in configuration management. All right, user information. You select the specific user, and then you have some of this customer specific stuff is going to be, if you want them to maintain the credit information on the customer window. So if you want to let them give a credit limit or information like that, you would set that to maintain. If you set it to view only, they won't be able to edit it, but they will be able to see it. And then there's not allowed, so that credit tab on the customer window will be grayed out for them. On the sales orders, you have release credit held order, and that'll be yes or no. And again, this is going to be specific per user. Now, those are, I believe, those are the only ones specific to credit or releasing credit holds for user permissions, is that credit information and then also the release credit hold. And then if you want to set your customer credit options as a whole, that's done in the customer section, customer options, and you can see this credit evaluation here over on the right hand side. So deny credit if invoices are overdue, and then you can give them a grace period. Also deny credit if over limit, and then if you do this, zero limit indicates no pre-approved credit. So if you check this and their credit limit is zero, they'll have to be released each time you create and save a new order. You can choose to include open sales orders and service orders, and you can also choose, if you use the service billing, you can choose include unbilled time and materials on business activities. And talking about business activities, that kind of moves us into the next topic for discussion. So we have RMA options. There are quite a few options and a lot of stuff that you can do with this, so I'm just going to cover the basics here. One is to utilize business activities to link all related transactions, customer records, and sales to the specific business activity. The business activity number would be the RMA number. So what you would do is, once you've added all the related transactions, you would create the credit either from the sales order that you had originally, if you wanted to copy all the products into that credit, or do create credit from the business activity itself. to create a credit memo and eventually release that credit to your customer to either return items or give them an amount back. Now, for customers without business activities, you can simply create a credit for the customer, either from the original order to copy the products to the credit or create one manually in the credit window. Releasing this credit by clicking Create Credit on the credit memo window will return items listed as inventoried items, or if you're using a non-standard product, let's say they're not returning it, but you wanted to give them a credit on their account to be either refunded or applied to a prior invoice, and then you would use that non-standard item, and whenever you create that credit, it's just going to be an amount. If it's that non-standard item, it's not going to actually return it. But if it is an item from inventory, creating that credit will return that item to the warehouse selected on the credit. I would suggest returning items into the original warehouse they were sold out of, and then if you're going to utilize a different returns or damages warehouse, transfer them into that warehouse. That's because if you're using something like lot or serial control, the cost, it's very specific to the warehouse. So if there was no originating transaction in the returns warehouse for that lot or serial number, it's best to go ahead and return it into the original warehouse and then transfer it into a damaged or returns warehouse for you to process and see, do you need to do something to that product to make it sellable again? Are you going to throw it out? Is it okay? Do you do like a quality assurance or something like that test whenever customers return it? Doing that returns or damaged warehouse would give you the ability to separate that out. We had quite a few questions come in specifically about balance adjustments, and some of them were the difference between balance adjustments and landed cost, and what's the difference and what recommendation will we have to use them for. So let's start with balance adjustments. These transactions utilize the inventory and gain loss account assigned to the warehouse. Some customers have a distinct gain loss account assigned to the warehouse, and some customers use the same GL account they have assigned to inventory adjustment. This is up to your discretion. This transaction sets the end of day total balance for your items. So this is quantity and unit cost. And that end of day part is what's very important about balance adjustments. So this means posting a balance adjustment at the start of the day to set the total quantity on hand to 10 with a unit cost of 50 will mean that Activate will change that balance adjustment as you post other transactions throughout the day to ensure that the end of the day balance is 10. What this means is, let's say you've posted a balance adjustment at the beginning of the day for the same day to have this quantity on hand of 10. Then on that same day, you create a customer invoice for 2. The balance adjustment quantity is going to go up to 12 to ensure your end of day balance is 10. So the same goes for receipts or any other transactions. The balance adjustment fluctuates based on posted transactions as of the same day because this is the last transaction Activate posts for each day. So in implementation, or for those of you that are creating new products and need to use the initial balance import, the initial balance import is treated slightly different in that it is treated as of the beginning of the day. So if you're using the initial balance, we do that so customers that are going live, once Create Company is done or once the imports are done, they're able to post invoices and transactions as of the same day. So it's not going to cause that balance adjustment to fluctuate. But for any other inventory balance adjustment that's used from the transactions menu of the inventory window, those will always be considered as of end of the day. So let's say if you wanted to set the end of day and you also want to invoice as of the same day, but the end of day quantity is for maybe the day before because that's what you ended with yesterday, change the session date to be the day before. So that way the end of day quantity affects the day before, which you're not going to be backdating anything else. And so invoices that you're posting today do not affect that balance adjustment. For normal businesses that use the inventory balance adjustment, normally they're using this to correct unit cost or their ending balances. So just keep that in mind. Landed cost is utilized to allocate cost either from third-party bills or other amounts on a purchase invoice that are included. It gives you the ability not only allocate an amount across specific transactions, but also create the vendor bill related to this cost if this is a bill that's like a third-party bill outside of your normal PO invoices. This includes shipping, customs, duties for those of you that are importing goods from overseas, or any additional costs that you wish to allocate the items. We definitely suggest utilizing landed cost to do so if you have that module, because this, it's not going to be like a balance adjustment. It's not going to fluctuate at all. It's going to be as of that moment, and it also gives you the ability to create that vendor bill. So when you post landed cost, this uses the inventory asset account and the landed cost GL account assigned assigned to the warehouse, and it'll be an increase or decrease depending on if it's a negative or positive. And then there's an alternate side to this entry, just like a purchase order process. It creates that vendor bill and it reconciles the amount out of the landed cost account and into accounts payable. It works exactly like creating a purchase invoice and receiving an Activate, except there's less of a time difference between receiving and invoicing because you're posting that landed cost, so the allocation and the bill are created at the same time. If you don't check create bill, just make sure that whatever bill you've created in QuickBooks to use the same landed cost account assigned to that warehouse, so there's not going to be a balance sitting in your landed cost account. All right, inventory adjustments are utilized for quantity adjustments only, and it goes into effect at the time you post it. So this transaction is posted also when you're performing inventory count. Any variances are using this inventory adjustment account. This again will use the inventory and the inventory adjustment accounts assigned to the related warehouses. Inventory receipts work just like landed cost in the fact that it uses the inventory and purchases account assigned to the warehouse. The purchases account will typically have a balance sitting for a short period of time depending on the time difference between receipt and receiving the PO invoice itself. As long as you're performing the complete purchasing process and Activate, the balance will accurately reflect what's been received and not yet invoiced. Once invoiced, the invoice reconciles the purchase account into accounts payable, so the net result of a purchasing process is an increase in inventory asset and an increase in your accounts payable. All right, inventory transfers utilize both inventory accounts assigned on each warehouse selected in the transfer session. So there is a journal created to move the value from one asset account to another, but the net result in your cumulative inventory asset is $0 because that unit cost is moving from one asset to another. All right, and also it's a good practice to go through your inventory transaction sessions to clean them up periodically. We've seen in the past where customers, maybe that are newer to the system, will open a purchase order, click receive, which creates our inventory receipt transaction, and then they'll close it and save it, but then when they're ready to actually receive it, they'll open the PO and click receive again. That does not open the original receipt session that you opened. It creates a new one. So you will have this receipt session sitting in your session list that's not posted, that doesn't need to be posted if you post that secondary one. So let's look at Activate and go into inventory receipts. And you'll see all these sessions in the dropdown. So let's say somebody went and accidentally created multiple receipt sessions. This one doesn't have anything on it, so obviously we don't need it. So especially if you're going to be closing your books on a regular basis, I definitely recommend cleaning these out. Any session that's in the drop downs for your inventory transactions mean that it is an open session that has not been posted. To delete the session, click this red X, and then you'll see this, everything's going to be permanently removed. Do you want to continue? Click OK. All right, and then you would do that on each transaction that you would need to. Also, kind of related to the issued purchase orders, one of the questions that was related to that is we have all these issued purchase orders that are sitting here. Is it affecting our inventory? What do we need to do? Do we need to clean them out? I would definitely suggest if you've got issued purchase orders that, let's say they're issued and you received partial, but you're not going to receive the remaining quantity, change the purchase order status to complete to get them out of your list, so that way that outstanding quantity on that issued purchase order will not affect your Reorder Wizard. So that's just part of, doing some cleanup. Especially if you're closing your books or using that Reorder Wizard, make sure you don't have just unnecessary sessions listed in your session list, so that way it's not affecting anything. But another note, unless you post it, it's not going to affect your on-hand quantities. And then also you can void transactions. That's in the inventory menu, void inventory session. These are going to be your inventory transactions. You can see types, dates, open, date open, vendor name, purchase order. You can filter on specific types. Once you select it, just verify that's what you're doing, what you're wanting to void. Maybe take a note of that in case you need to repost it, and then click void. Now this does void the whole session, not just the transaction. All right, and then there's also customers who need to run inventory valuation reports on a regular basis to keep track of inventory fluctuations. A great report to do so is the inventory valuation report. This gives you the ability to set an as-of date to see the fluctuations as needed. You can also run the balance sheet reports in QuickBooks for specific date ranges to find out the same information. So that's really just based on your own comfortableness with the system. There were also a few questions about commissions as well. Commissions themselves are processed in QuickBooks. Activate has 2 reports to show you the total value of sales with margin and profit percent per rep, but this does not allow certain percentages or cutting the checks to your sales reps. It just gives you the totals so you have the necessary information to go ahead and run those commissions in QuickBooks. Now those two reports are the commission report and commission on paid invoices. The difference is the paid invoices only shows information for invoices paid in full. If you need to see them regardless of balance, just use the generic commission report. All right, back to the inventory transactions. We have each transaction register listed in the inventory section of the reports menu. You can see open as well as posted sessions with the created and posted user listed on each one. So this enables you not only to have to not print each session to keep up with manually, you can just simply print the report and see the details therein. The last report question sent in was regards to barcode labels and Activate. We have a standard product barcode report that you can print from the product window, inventory menu, and purchase order window. When printing from the product or inventory menu, you can choose the amount of labels to print as well as a specific item. When printing from the PO window, it will print one label per unit per line, and this is due to the assumption that you'll be receiving the entire PO and need to label each unit. Okay, so I'm going to take a look at some of the questions and see if we can get those answered. Is there a way to change the cost at all warehouses at once instead of having to do it one at a time? The answer to that is no, and that's because cost is based on the warehouse. For those of you that are using warehouses separate out like final versus raw materials, or maybe you have warehouses to separate based on product categories and you're not using product class to do income and cost of goods sold, obviously that might make it a little bit of a pain to update the unit cost or quantities using balance adjustments. But yes, cost is linked to the warehouse specifically, so you will have to do it per warehouse. Now, if you want to do that across multiple warehouses, what you can do in Activate is you can have multiple transactions in one session. So let's go to inventory balance adjustment. We'll do new. Transaction 1 is going to be warehouse D. We're going to do A121 just to be easy. This is the total quantity on hand and unit cost as of the moment, or as of the date of the session, which is 6/27. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Now what transactions do is it gives you the ability to do multiple transactions for across multiple warehouses for multiple items in one session. So when you post a session, it posts each transaction for the session at one time. So you'd say add transaction. I'm going to do warehouse F now, A121. Now that warehouse F has 300. So if we hit save, and we're going to hit print before we actually post it, just so you can see the transactions, we've got transaction 1 with the balance. It doesn't have any adjustment because I didn't modify it. And then transaction 2. So when you post it, it's going to post transaction 1 first and then transaction 2 and so forth. So for those of you that use nested assemblies or something like that, I know this is not related to cost itself, but if you had sub-assemblies, make sure to have the lowest point or whatever's required first as first transaction, and then the second step as transaction 2. Now there's a little caveat to that. If you're using lot numbers or serial numbers and those are being created in an assembly session, you will need to post the session to create that lot number to be used in the next step. So if you're not using lot or serial numbers, you can use transactions to do the multi-level assemblies. All right, so back to the purchasing. I'd like to see multiple order quantity to be added to the item for purchasing. As reviewing the Reorder Wizard and business alerts, if it's telling me to order 37 pounds of red dye, but I order in quantities of 40 pounds, it would recommend 40 pounds instead of 37. So what I would do there is if it's always 40 pounds, maybe create a unit of measure that's a product specific, assuming that you might have different number of pounds per product, and give it a unique name so you can say that I'm ordering a number of these 40-pound like totes. All right, so we've got a question about pricing. Is there a way to set a price list for a product that would look at the price list first, and if not, if a product is not in that list, to take the cost and multiply it by a specific percentage per list? So there is a hierarchy in pricing in Activate. Activate will go through these steps. First, it will check to see if there's a customer contract and if that contract is related to customer specific price. It will use that price if that exists. If that doesn't exist, it will see if there is a customer specific price unrelated to a customer contract. If that doesn't exist, it will see if there is a customer specific price category price for that customer. When that doesn't exist, it will see if there is a product specific price related to the price code set as the default price code on the customer window. If there's no price there, it will go to the price category of the product. It'll say, okay, so if none of those exist, but there's a price category assigned to the product and a related price to that category that's related to the default price code on the customer record, it will use the product price category price. If none of those exist, it will be based off list. Now, we do have a way to do percentages based on list or an amount based on list. And we also have price set up that is based on cost. So just take a look at your options there on that product price window. Okay, so how do I change filter options on a specific report in Configuration Manager? You have tried to add a filter, but report comes up blank every time. That tells me either the filter that you've added and the filter that you're using, you might not be using the right values. So if it becomes a text field, the text that you're entering has to match exactly what's set up in the database. If it gives you the ability to use a dropdown, like if you're adding warehouse. So let's take a look at inventory evaluation and selection prompts. So you see here that the prompt itself, when it has a name like product ID, product type, sales category, product class, what this means is you're going to be able to select from the dropdown to specify the values that you're filtering on. But if you add something like, let's do description, and it's text, that is going to mean that you're going to have to type in the description. So if you use something like equal to and what you've typed doesn't exactly match a value in the database, it's going to come up blank. There's not going to be anything to filter on. Now, if you set this, like this one's text, but you can set it to warehouse. What that means is now you'll be able to select from a drop-down to select the specific warehouse. So again, that goes back to, it sounds like instead of having a specific type selected based on what that value is, it's saying it's text, and whatever text you're writing doesn't match exactly, and that's why your report is probably showing up blank. That is an assumption I'm making. If that's not the case, create a support request and somebody would be happy to help you and see what's going on with that. We've got one question that does bring up a good topic. In regards to unit of measure, I have vendors that only sell in quantities of 12, but they need PO to have individual units, not by case. So how do I enter a PO in cases but have it print in each? So that would actually fall under report modifications. So if you wanted your users to go ahead and enter them in by cases, but you wanted the printed PO form to be in each, the PO detail view in the database actually does show the stocking units involved based on the display unit. So if you create a support request for our support team, we would be happy to swap out the display quantity and display unit for your stocking quantity and stocking unit. So that way your vendor is seeing each, but your user is ordering a number of cases. And that goes for most report modifications. We do standard report modifications and Activate during your implementation. That includes modifications to your order, invoice, pick ticket, pack list, purchase order, bill of lading, pretty much anything that's customer or vendor facing. We do dabble slightly in regrouping reports for your other standard reports. Let's say if product type is really important to you and you see one or two reports that are grouped on product class and you want that group to be switched, again, just let us know and we can switch out the grouping for that. When it comes to completely customized reports or completely rewriting reports, we will either direct you to do that in-house or send you a list of report writing consultants, because normally if you're needing one extensive custom report, guaranteed you're probably going to need multiple, and working with a custom report writer would give you more flexibility and also be way more efficient than somebody in our team doing that, because we do bill for custom report writing over a certain time period. We have some questions about shortcut keys. We definitely have the ability to utilize shortcut keys. We have a help article that lists all shortcuts available in Activate. The most common ones that I use is Control E for edit, Control S for save, Control Z for undo. You can do Control N to create new. If you're wanting to look something up, you can hit F4. If you're wanting to search the help site based on the window you have open, hit F1. That will open a help article linked to the specific window that you have open to give you step-by-step instructions if needed. So let's say if you're on a purchase order and all the details therein. Are there plans to make the transaction forms customizable? All forms in Activate are customizable. You just have to customize them in Crystal Reports. So if you're familiar with custom report writing and you're comfortable doing that, then go ahead and purchase a copy of Crystal Reports so you can do so in-house, because you can open all of our standard reports are available to you to edit, and those are going to be found in your reports menu. So program files, activate, reports, letter, unless you're UK, then you'll do the A4. These are all the activate reports that you see in your report menu. They're all RPT files that can be modified in Crystal Reports. If you are going to be customizing your reports, make sure to save them in the custom reports file. Now what that means, the easiest way to get there is through the help menu and activate, activate support, email activate log file, and then if you open the folder, this will put you in the proper directory for you to do custom reports. All you have to do is go up one folder and then open custom reports. So anything in here that the name matches the standard report name will be used over the standard report. If you rename the report to not match the standard report name, make sure to swap out the file name and configuration management in the report catalog to utilize that new report. We've got a question on settings customer specific shipping instructions that would default on documents. We definitely do have the ability to do that. For customers, the defaults are going to be based on the ship to locations. So you would click on the ship to tab and then select the ship to location that you want to specify these defaults on. Select delivery instructions on the left hand side, and this will default not only the comment, the shipping instructions, and the special instructions. Now this miscellaneous comment would be a ship to pop-up. This will show on the shipping tab on the sales order. You won't be able to edit on the sales order. This is a note directly from the customer window. These delivery instructions will default, but you will be able to override them on the sales order. The same goes for job number, ship via, and FOB, as well as tax category for your ship to locations. Those would all set defaults for those windows. And if you have a default credit card, you would, on the credit tab, enter in the details of the credit card, and that will display. Once you select the preferred payment method on the sales order, it will default the credit card to what's listed on the credit tab of the customer window. Is it possible to receive non-inventoried items and invoice non-inventoried items without creating a new part number? Absolutely. The only caveat is you cannot receive non-inventoried items because it is a non-inventoried item. The only items that can be received into your warehouse are going to be inventoried. So if you want to track how much quantity on hand you have of that product, I suggest you set it up as an inventoried item. If it is a non-inventoried item, what you do is you override the quantity approved on the purchase invoice window. All right, create a new one. Alright, this is an inventoried item, and then let's select a non-inventoried item. Do the desk pad. Alright, you can see the GL expense account shows here as cost of goods sold. This is only going to show for items that are non-inventoried. If that item is a standard costed item, then you'll see the standard cost offset account here listed as a GL expense account. If it is not a standard costed item, you'll see the cost of goods sold account assigned to the product class for that item. Receive. It's going to do the glass cleaner. I'm going to give it a unit cost. Actually, no, I'm going to save it as 0 so you can see the updating the price. Alright, so now when I click invoice, it defaults the approved quantity for glass cleaner to be 20 and 0 for the Cal 10 pack. That's because you don't receive it. This defaults to what's been received. So in the green box, you override it to be 2. Because I'm going to go ahead and invoice all of it. And let's say they charge me $10 per unit. And then this one, maybe it's not a good one to round, so they did 1201.75 or something. So it might be easier to do the line amount approved rather than the unit price, and it will calculate what the unit price should be. This comes into play for those of you that are doing catch weight scenarios. So you stock, sell, and purchase by the case, but everything's priced by the pound. The purchase order window doesn't allow you to price by the pound and order by the case. So what you do is you still order by the case, you receive the number of cases, and then when you go to invoice, you make the line amount approved match the line amount on the vendor invoice. And that will calculate the case price in case your vendor invoice is per pound. Alright, invoice number. Alright, save, create invoice. Here's that prompt asking you to update the receipt because you received it at $0, but you're invoicing it at $60. Yes, mark it as complete because I'm invoicing everything. How do you change the cost on a balance adjustment? That is the unit cost field. Inventory balance adjustment, new. Unit cost. You override this to be, instead of 237, I'm going to do 250. Or you can do the total value of 15 for it to calculate the unit cost. Either one. Okay, so we've got a question about why are there values in accrued purchase receipts and it's a liability account shown on our balance sheet. So this is because accrued purchase receipts is an other current liability, because you have received those items and you have to pay your vendor for those items, but you haven't received the vendor bill yet. So it's considered an other current liability as a value on your books until you create that purchase invoice. In creating that purchase invoice in Activate moves the value from accrued purchase receipts into accounts payable, and that's on the purchase invoice. Your cost of goods sold account does not get used until, at least for inventoried items, until you invoice your customer, because that is the cost of goods sold to your customer. You're not going to hit cost of goods sold as you purchase inventory. You're going to hit cost of goods sold as you sell your inventory. I hope that makes sense. So let me know if you have any questions about that. I would create a support request so somebody can go in detail on that specific question. Okay, so we've got one more question, actual versus average costing methods. Is there a way to see how much a product costs at a moment in time, or if average costing method used over a set period of time? So actual is only used for lot or serial controlled items. And what that is, it is an average for the specific lot or serial number whenever you receive it or invoice it to your customer. So that cost is going to be linked to the specific identifier, which is the lot or serial number. Average cost is an average cost of your entire warehouse. So it takes into account the value of the transactions that you've posted and divides it by the quantity on hand to get your current average cost. If you have questions about what your average cost was at a certain point in time, you can use the inventory valuation report and use that as of date to see the fluctuations. So that's in the warehouse section, inventory valuation, and then you set the as of date. This will show you the average cost. Also, if you wanted a quick snapshot of one or two products and you don't want to run that report, you can create an inventory balance adjustment session. Don't post it unless you want to change anything. Hit new, set the date. I'll show you 6/27 because this may have changed. 237. That's the average cost as of 6/27. If I hit undo, new, let's try, I'm not sure if this fluctuated or not. We didn't have any quantity on hand as of 6/27/2015. So let's delete this and maybe try 2017. We had 14 on hand, same unit cost. So this one doesn't really fluctuate, but it will show you the unit cost as of that date. Now, if you're using lot serial numbers and you're using a cost method other than actual, your cost, your unit cost, is not going to be linked to your lot or serial number. So for those of you that are using FIFO and lot numbers, let's say your warehouse employee pulls a lot number that was not received first. From that point forward, your cost layers will not match up to your lot numbers. So if you're using lot or serial control, I suggest you use actual cost for those items. If you're using average cost, the same goes for a lot or serial control. It's going to be the average unit cost at the time of invoice whenever you're creating that sales invoice. So if you want it to be related to that specific lot or serial number, then use actual cost. All right, and then the Activate help site, as always, we are constantly updating content, adding to it, updating stuff, adding screenshots. If you're not seeing something that you think should be on the help site, let us know and we'll definitely write something up for you. If you have a question about it, then most likely somebody else has a question about it as well. I hope you got some good information out of this webinar. Thank you for your time and have a great day.